They were wrong when they called Ranger an animal. On New Cedar, nobody called him that. Not the kids who saved half their lunch to sneak him pieces of cornbread. Not the nurses at the clinic who let him sleep under the front desk during dust storms. And definitely not Ethan Walker, the quiet white man in the faded marine jacket who had not gone anywhere without that old German shepherd in almost 7 years. Ranger was gray around the muzzle now, stiff in the hips, one ear permanently folded from an injury nobody in town liked talking about. But every morning at 5:12, he still pushed his nose against Ethan's bedroom door like rent was due. Ethan would groan, sit up, and say the same thing every day. "You are retired, old man." Ranger would sneeze like he disagreed. Then the two of them would step out into the cold red dawn, past the porch light buzzing with dust moths, past the American flag Ethan kept clean even when the wind tried to bury it, and down the road toward town. New Cedar was not much to look at from orbit. One water tower, for-grained domes, a schoolhouse painted white, a clinic built from prefabricated panels, and about 600 people stubborn enough to farm a planet that wanted to stay empty. But on the ground, it felt like home. It smelled like coffee, engine oil, warm bread, and dry soil after the irrigation pumps kicked on. Folks waved from porches. Kids shouted Ranger's name before they shouted Ethan's. "Morning, Mr. Walker," called Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery, holding up a paper bag. Ethan tipped 2 fingers off his cap. "Morning. Biscuit for the hero? He is on a diet." Ranger sat immediately. Mrs. Alvarez laughed. "Sure he is." Ethan took the biscuit anyway, broke it in half, and gave Ranger the smaller piece while pretending not to notice the dog was offended. That was Ethan's way. He did not make big speeches. He did not tell people he cared. He fixed a broken fence before sunrise, carried groceries for widows without being asked, and left cash in the church donation box when he thought nobody was looking. Most people knew he had been a Marine. Some new Ranger had been a search and rescue dog attached to his unit. Fewer knew Ethan's wife, Hannah, had died 3 winters back in the Heliox mine collapse, and that Ranger had dragged Ethan out of the dark afterward in more ways than one. Ethan never said the dog saved his life. He just fed him before he fed himself. At 7:30, they reached the schoolyard. Human children and alien children spilled through the gate together, backpacks bouncing, voices overlapping in English, trade speech, and the soft clicking language of the Moran refugees. A little Moran girl named Lisa ran straight to Ranger and wrapped all 4 thin arms around his neck. "Good morning, Mr. Dog." Ranger leaned into her like an old gentleman accepting a medal. Ethan watched them with the tired half-smile people only saw when he forgot to hide it. "Easy with him," he said. "He has got old bones." Lisa looked up, serious as a judge. "Old bones are still brave bones." Ethan did not answer right away. He swallowed, scratched Ranger behind the ear, and looked toward the horizon where the morning sun was climbing over the ridge. For one clean second, the world felt almost kind. Then the school bell cut off mid-ring. Every light in town flickered. Ranger stood up so fast his joints popped. Ethan felt the change before he understood it, the way old soldiers feel a room go wrong. The dust above the northern ridge began to rise in a long, black shadow. Mrs. Alvarez stepped out of the bakery, flowers still on her hands. The clinic doors opened. Parents came out onto porches. High above New Cedar, 3 Ver Dominion warships slid into view, blocking the sun one piece at a time. Their hulls were dark, sharp, and silent, like knives laid across the sky. Someone whispered, "Why are they here?" Ethan reached down and took hold of Ranger's collar, not because the dog needed restraint, but because Ethan suddenly needed something solid under his hand. Ranger growled low in his chest. Ethan looked at the schoolyard, at the children, at the town that had given him a place to be lonely without being alone, and his voice dropped into the calm, flat tone he had not used in years. "Everybody inside," he said. "Right now." The first Dominion shuttle came down in the middle of Main Street, not on the landing pad, not outside the fence line, but right where families crossed every morning on their way to school. It was not an accident. Ethan knew that before the landing, dust even settled. Men who wanted a fair conversation parked where people could breathe. Men who wanted fear parked on top of your life and waited for you to thank them. The shuttle doors opened with a slow mechanical hiss, and a line of Ver soldiers stepped out in black armor that made them look taller than they already were. Their helmets had narrow red visors. Their rifles stayed angled low, but not low enough. Behind them came Warlord Threxval, 8 feet of gray-black skin, copper scars, and polished armor that caught the weak morning light like an oil slick. He did not hurry. He wanted the whole town to watch him arrive. Mayor Helen Brooks stood near the water tower with both hands raised, trying to look calm for the children watching from behind school windows. "This is a civilian agricultural settlement," she called out. "We are under trade protection through the Neutral Colony Agreement. If there has been a misunderstanding, we can contact the regional office and settle it properly." Threx turned his head toward her like he had just noticed a fly speaking English. His translator collar clicked once, then produced a deep, smooth voice. "There is no misunderstanding. New Cedar has been selected for resource collection under Dominion expansion law. Your water rights, grain stores, fuel cells, and long-range communications are now property of the Ver Dominion." A nervous sound moved through the crowd. Not quite a gasp, not quite a prayer. Ethan stood at the edge of the school steps, Ranger pressed against his leg, his fingers still hooked in the old leather collar. He counted 12 soldiers near the shuttle, 4 on the roofline by the clinic, 2 watching the school door, 1 officer pretending not to watch Ethan. The old part of his mind cataloged it all without asking permission. Ranges, angles, civilians, wind, exits. He hated how easily it came back. "You cannot just take our water," Helen said. Her voice shook on the last word, but she did not step back. "There are children here. Families. Refugees. We barely produce enough to survive the dry season." Threx smiled, though it did not reach anything human beings would call eyes. "Then you will learn efficiency." A young ranch hand named Caleb moved forward from the crowd, fists clenched, face red. He was 22, maybe 23, all heart and no brakes. "You do not get to talk to her like that." Ethan caught his sleeve before he could take another step. Caleb jerked back. "Let go of me." Ethan did not look at him. "No, they are robbing us." "I know." "Then do something." Ethan finally turned his head, and Caleb saw something in his face that cooled him faster than any warning could have. Ethan spoke quietly, almost kindly. "Do not give him what he came for." Caleb looked toward the children in the school windows and swallowed hard. Ethan released his sleeve. Threx had watched the exchange with visible amusement. "How obedient," the warlord said. "The older mammal understands survival." A few Dominion soldiers made a clicking sound that passed for laughter. Ranger's lips lifted just enough to show teeth. Ethan lowered his hand and brushed 2 fingers over the dog's head. "Easy," he murmured. "Not yet." Threx took 1 heavy step closer. "You have 10 minutes to assemble your local authority and surrender all access codes. If you cooperate, your settlement may continue existing as a labor district. If you resist, it becomes an example." Helen looked at Ethan then, not because he was in charge, but because scared people always look for the person who has been scared before and survived it. Ethan wanted to tell her he was not that man anymore. He wanted to tell her Hannah had made him promise to leave war behind, to fix fences, to grow tomatoes in bad soil, to come home every night tired and clean and ordinary. Instead, he looked at the warships blotting out the blue above New Cedar, then down at Ranger, whose old body was trembling with the need to protect people who had become his flock. Ethan took 1 slow breath. "Mayor," he said, "get everyone inside the town hall. Keep the kids away from the windows." Threx tilted his head. "And you, human?" Ethan met the warlord's stare without raising his voice. "I am going to stand right here." For a few seconds, nobody moved. Even the wind seemed to hold still, dragging red dust across Main Street in a thin, nervous sheet. Threxval stared down at Ethan like he had found something mildly entertaining on the bottom of his boot. "You will stand there," the warlord repeated, letting the translator stretch the words so every person in New Cedar could hear them. "With a farm animal and an old jacket." Ethan did not answer. That bothered Threx more than an insult would have. Ethan had seen men like him before, not 8 feet tall and wrapped in alien armor, but close enough where it counted. Some men walked into a room and needed the fear in it to point toward them. If it did not, they started breaking things until it did. Ethan kept his breathing slow. For counts in, for counts out. Ranger leaned against his shin, warm and solid, his low growl vibrating through the old leather collar. "Easy," Ethan whispered. "Stay with me." Across the street, Mayor Brooks guided people toward the town hall doors. Parents held children tight. Mr. Patel from the hardware store kept looking back at his shop, probably thinking about the hunting rifles locked under the counter. Ethan caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. No, not with those warships overhead. Not with kids behind glass. Not today. A Dominion officer stepped forward carrying a flat black device and pressed it into Helen Brooks's hands. Access codes, he said. Water processing, storage domes, fuel depot, communication tower. Helen looked down at the device as if it weighed 100 pounds. I need authorization from the Colony Council. Threx laughed softly. You need permission to surrender what is already mine. His soldiers enjoyed that. The clicking laughter moved through them in little bursts. Ethan watched their rifles drift toward the crowd whenever someone shifted too fast. Every instinct in him wanted to step between those barrels and the people. Every memory in him knew that stepping too soon could turn fear into panic. He hated the math of it. He hated that he was still good at it. A small voice came from the school entrance. Mr. Walker? Ethan turned just enough to see Lisa pressed against the inside of the door, her 4 hands flattened on the glass. Miss Carter, the teacher, pulled her back gently, but not before Ethan saw the fear in the girl's face. Ranger saw it too. The dog's growl stopped. His ears lifted. Threx followed Ethan's gaze and smiled. The young ones. Useful. Every species becomes reasonable when its offspring are near. Ethan felt something cold and clean move through him. Not anger yet. Something older than anger. Something with discipline around it. Leave the school out of this, he said. His voice was low, plain, almost tired. Threx stepped closer until his shadow covered Ethan and Ranger both. Or what? The town seemed to shrink around that question. Ethan could smell the hot metal of the shuttle, dust in the air, coffee still burning on somebody's stove. He thought of Hannah standing in their kitchen 3 years ago, one hand on his chest, saying, "Promise me you will come home as Ethan, not as the war." He had promised. He meant it then. He still meant it now. So he let the silence sit. He did not threaten. He did not reach for the sidearm locked in the safe under his bed. He did not give Threx the excuse he wanted. Threx took that silence and mistook it for surrender. Good, the warlord said. The trained mammal understands. Ranger bared his teeth. Ethan laid his hand flat on the dog's head. Not yet, buddy, he said, barely above a breath. But this time, when Ethan looked up, there was no softness left in his eyes. The first thing that broke was not a wall or a window. It was a mother's voice. From the far side of the schoolyard, a Moran woman cried out, sharp and terrified, and every head turned at once. Lisa had slipped through the side door. Nobody blamed her later. She was a child, and children do not understand occupation lines or military pressure or why grown-ups suddenly stop acting like grown-ups. She saw her mother across Main Street, saw soldiers between them, and ran. Lisa, stop, Miss Carter shouted from the doorway. But the little girl was already past the steps, her small shoes kicking red dust behind her. A Dominion soldier turned too fast. His rifle came up out of reflex, not aimed with thought, just raised because fear had made him stupid. Ethan moved, but Ranger moved first. For one impossible second, the old dog was young again. He tore out from under Ethan's hand, crossed the street in a gray and black blur, and slammed his body against Lisa hard enough to knock her sideways into the soft dust near the bakery steps. The rifle's warning flash struck the ground where she had been a heartbeat earlier, throwing up a burst of heat and light that made everyone duck. Lisa screamed. Her mother broke through the crowd and crawled to her, pulling the child into her arms. Ranger stood between them and the soldier, legs stiff, head low, every inch of him saying no. The whole town saw it. Human children saw it. Alien children saw it. Even some of the Dominion soldiers saw it and lowered their weapons without being ordered. For the first time since he landed, Threxval looked embarrassed. Not afraid. Not sorry. Embarrassed. An old Earth dog had done what his army had not. It had protected the weak. Ethan stepped forward, both hands open. Ranger, he said, calm but tight. Come here, boy. Ranger did not move. His eyes stayed on the soldier. Threx stared at the dog, then at the watching town, and Ethan understood with a sick drop in his stomach what kind of man the warlord was. Threx could have let the moment pass. He could have laughed it off. He could have pretended not to care. Instead, he walked toward Ranger. Your beast interfered with Dominion authority, Threx said. Ethan's voice cut through the street. He saved a child. Threx looked back at him. It humiliated a soldier. Then your soldier needed humiliating. The town went silent. Ethan had not raised his voice, but every word landed clean. Threx smiled slowly. There he is. Ethan knew then. The warlord had been waiting for something to punish. Do not, Ethan said. Just 2 words. Not a plea. Not a threat. A line. Threx crossed it anyway. He struck Ranger with the back of his armored hand, not with enough force to end him, but with enough cruelty to make the whole street flinch. Ranger fell onto his side with a sound Ethan would hear for the rest of his life. For 1 second, Ethan did not breathe. The world lost its edges. The warships, the soldiers, the town, even Threx, all of it blurred away until there was only Ranger trying to lift his head and not understanding why his legs would not listen. Ethan reached him before anyone else moved. He dropped to his knees in the dust, slid both hands gently under the old dog's head, and pressed his forehead to Ranger's. Easy, buddy, he whispered, and his voice almost broke on the word. I am here. I am right here. Ranger's tail moved once, weak but certain, because even hurt, even confused, he knew Ethan's voice. Behind them, Lisa was crying into her mother's shoulder. Mayor Brooks covered her mouth with both hands. Caleb looked ready to do something that would get him killed. Ethan lifted one hand without looking back, palm down, and the young man froze. Threx stood over them, pleased with himself, waiting for rage, waiting for a fight, waiting for the primitive human to become the animal he believed all humans were. Ethan gave him nothing. He sat in the red dust with his dog in his arms, breathing slowly, forcing every shaking part of himself into stillness. Then he looked up at Threx, and his eyes were wet, but his voice was colder than the shadow under a stone. You should have left him alone. No one in New Cedar spoke after Ethan said it. The town had gone quiet in a way that did not feel empty. It felt loaded, like the air before lightning hits a fence post. Ethan kept one hand under Ranger's neck and the other pressed gently against the dog's ribs, feeling for every breath. Ranger was still with him. That was the only thing keeping Ethan on his knees instead of on his feet. Clinic, Ethan said, without looking away from Threx. Miss Carter was the first to move. Then Mayor Brooks. Then 2 farmhands brought a folding stretcher from the school emergency cabinet and carried it over with the careful fear of people carrying something sacred. Threx watched them, amused by the tenderness. All this ceremony for a beast. Ethan stood slowly, Ranger cradled against his chest as best as he could manage. The dog was heavy, 78 pounds of old muscle and trust, and Ethan felt every pound of him. Move, Ethan said. The Dominion soldiers did not understand at first. No one had spoken to them like that since they landed. One of them shifted his rifle across the path. Ethan looked at him, and whatever the soldiers saw made him step aside. Inside the clinic, Nurse Angela Price cleared the front table with one sweep of her arm, sending bandages and scanner packs sliding into a drawer. Put him here, she said, her voice steady because she had spent 20 years making scared people believe steady was possible. Ethan laid Ranger down as gently as if the table were made of glass. Angela ran a handheld scanner over him, her mouth tightening. He is hurt bad, Ethan, but he is breathing. I need quiet and I need room. You have it. Ethan stepped back, but Ranger's paw twitched toward him. Ethan took it in his hand. I am not leaving. The clinic door opened behind them. Threx entered like he owned the building. Beside him walked Envoy Sareva, tall and silver blue, her formal robes untouched by the dust outside. She carried herself like law had a spine, and she was it. Her eyes moved from Ranger to Ethan with clinical distance. A formal complaint has been filed by Warlord Threxval, she said. Your animal interfered with a military officer during a lawful Dominion action. Angela looked up from the scanner. That animal saved a child. Sarava's expression did not change. Under Dominion classification, nonverbal companion creatures are considered personal property unless registered as sentient auxiliaries. Ethan said nothing. Sareva continued, almost bored. Property cannot be a victim of military misconduct. At most, this is a civil compensation matter. The Dominion may offer replacement livestock or payment in local currency. Mayor Brooks, standing near the medicine cabinet, whispered, You cannot be serious. Threx smiled. The human will apologize for allowing his property to obstruct my soldier. Then he will provide the access codes. Ethan looked down at Ranger. The old dog's breathing rasped softly, but his eyes were open now, fixed on Ethan with exhausted faith. Ethan reached for the collar around Ranger's neck. His fingers found the old metal tag beneath the worn leather. He unclipped it and wiped dust from the stamped letters with his thumb. United States Marine Corps Search and Rescue. Service Companion Ranger Walker. Registration active. Protected status confirmed. Ethan took out his battered phone, the same cracked screen model everyone teased him for refusing to replace. The emergency network was jammed, but the phone had one channel that did not belong to New Cedar, the colony office, or the Dominion. Hannah had once asked why he kept it. Ethan had told her old habits died hard. That was only half true. Some promises needed a way home. He photographed the tag. Then he recorded 12 seconds of video. Ranger on the clinic table, Angela working over him, Lisa crying quietly in her mother's arms, Threx standing there proud of himself. Ethan attached one line of text. Protected companion intentionally harmed during Dominion occupation of civilian colony. Requesting unit review. He pressed send. Sareva watched the confirmation light blink green. You contacted your government over an animal? Ethan slipped the tag into his palm and closed his fist around it. When he looked at her, his face was pale and calm, the kind of calm that made even Threx stop smiling for half a second. No, Ethan said. I called his unit. For the first hour after Ethan sent the file, nothing happened. No Earth fleet dropped out of the sky. No emergency broadcast cut through the Dominion jamming field. No angry voice from some admiral back home ordered Threxval to step away from the clinic. There was only Ranger breathing under Angela Price's careful hands, the low hum of medical equipment, and the sound of Dominion boots moving through New Cedar like they owned every floorboard in town. Threx took the silence as victory. By noon, he had moved into the mayor's office, put his boots on Helen Brooks's desk, and ordered Dominion banners projected over the water tower. You see, he told Sareva while sipping from a cup he had taken from the diner. The humans understand power. They make noise in private, then kneel in public. Sareva stood by the window, watching Ethan sit on the clinic steps with Ranger's metal tag turning slowly between his fingers. The man had not eaten. He had not shouted. He had not begged. He had simply stayed close to the door and answered every question from the children with the same quiet sentence. He is still fighting. Sareva did not like that kind of quiet. She had spent 20 years around kings, councils, generals, and frightened diplomats. Fear had a sound. Surrender had a sound. This was neither. Earth has not responded, Threx said. Because Earth is weak? Sareva asked. Because Earth is practical. They will not risk trade lanes over a creature. She looked down at her tablet. Then why are their trade lanes empty? Threx frowned. What? Sareva turned the screen toward him. Across the Dominion border, human cargo ships were dropping from registered routes one by one. Medical transports had departed 3 neutral stations without passengers listed. Earth insurance houses had canceled coverage across their space in the same minute, using identical language. Unacceptable military instability. Civilian contractors from Texas, Ohio, Alberta, and the lunar yards had pulled their people from every Dominion port without filing a complaint. Coincidence, Threx said, but his voice had lost some of its shine. Sareva did not answer. She opened the file Ethan had sent, expecting sentiment, maybe a soldier's grief dressed as legal theater. Instead, she found records. Service logs. Rescue citations. Treaty stamps. Ranger Walker had not been only Ethan's companion. 5 years earlier, during the Heliox mine collapse, he had gone into unstable tunnels 12 times after the machines failed. 37 survivors had been pulled out because of that dog. 14 were not human. One was the niece of High Arbiter Salyuan, whose signature sat on half the protection treaties Threx had spent his career ignoring. There was a photo attached from the ceremony afterward. Ranger, younger then, standing awkwardly beside Ethan in dress blues, while alien children placed a ribbon around his neck. Sareva read the final line twice. Decorated rescue companion. Protected status recognized by Terran, Council, and Imperial Humanitarian Accord. Her throat went dry. In the clinic, Angela stepped outside and crouched beside Ethan. He made it through the worst of it, she said softly. I am not promising anything, but he is stubborn. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. Always has been. You should come inside. In a minute. Across the street, Sareva watched him through the glass and finally understood the shape of the mistake. Threx had not hurt a pet. He had touched a memory, A promise. A piece of home that Earth had already written into law because humans knew themselves too well. Threx laughed when she told him. You are frightened of paperwork now. Sareva looked back at the empty shipping map, at the disappearing human signals, at the silence from Sol that suddenly felt less like absence and more like a breath being held. No, she said. I am frightened because they are reading it. The reply from Earth arrived at 3:17 in the afternoon, New Cedar local time, while the town sat under 3 warships in a sky the color of rusted tin. It did not come as a speech. There was no flag waving across the screens, no angry general leaning into a camera, no music, no threat dressed up as pride. It was a legal packet. 11 pages, clean formatting, black text, digital seals from the Terran Union, the Council Humanitarian Office, and something Sareva had never seen outside classified archives. Joint Service Companion Command. Her tablet chimed once. Then every Dominion device in the mayor's office froze, unlocked, and displayed the same words. Protected Companion Ranger Walker confirmed under active service status. Civilian Colony Occupation confirmed. Harmful action by Dominion Command Authority confirmed. Kennel Protocol Review complete. Enforcement authorized. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Threx laughed, so loudly the window glass trembled. Kennel Protocol? He looked around at his officers as if inviting them to enjoy the joke. They named a military response after a doghouse. A few soldiers clicked nervously, trying to laugh with him. Sareva did not. She scrolled down, and the farther she read, the less air seemed to stay in the room. The protocol had been written after the First Outer Belt War, when enemy raiders learned that humans would cross fire, vacuum, and starvation to retrieve children, medics, and companion animals. Most species had called that irrational. Earth had called it predictable. Then Earth did what humans always did with pain. They organized it. They wrote it down. They made it enforceable. This is not symbolic, Sareva said. This grants Earth the right to isolate the responsible commander, suspend Dominion military movement through treaty space, and disable any asset used to support the occupation. Threx waved one armored hand. Disable with what? Their cargo haulers? Their farmers? Their sad little rescue dogs. Sareva looked up. You do not understand humans. I understand that they love weakness and call it virtue. The next sound came from the Warlord's own command channel. A sharp burst of static. Then a voice from orbit, clipped and suddenly small. Dominion flagship to ground command. We have unidentified contacts at high altitude. Threx straightened. Put them through. The wall screen flickered. The image showed the upper atmosphere over New Cedar. At first, there was nothing but clouds and sunlight. Then the clouds bent outward in perfect circles, one after another, as if invisible stones had been dropped into the sky. Black shapes emerged through the distortion. Not sleek, not elegant, not imperial. Human ships were ugly in a practical way, all armor plates, heat scars, engine blocks, and hard angles. They looked less like ships and more like tools built by people who expected tools to be used until they broke. Sareva whispered, Terran interdiction craft. Threx's jaw tightened. Contact my fleet. An officer tried. His hands moved across the console. Once. Twice. His voice changed. My lord, First Orbital Group is not responding. Then contact the second. No response. The third. The officer swallowed. No response. No explosions lit the sky. No fire rained on New Cedar. Nothing dramatic happened for the town to see. That was what made it worse. The Dominion warships simply stopped talking, one by one, like candles being pinched out in another room. Inside the clinic, Ethan heard the first distant thunder roll above the ceiling. Angela glanced toward the window. Is that them? Ethan sat beside Ranger, his hand resting lightly on the dog's shoulder. Ranger was asleep under a warming blanket, breathing easier now, his old paws twitching once in a dream. Ethan did not look away from him. Yeah, he said. That is them. Lisa sat on a chair nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her mother's arm around her. Are they angry? She asked. Ethan thought about that. He thought about Earth, about Marines he had known, about people who could joke over bad coffee and still cross a battlefield for someone they had never met. No, he said finally. Not angry. Outside, every Dominion screen went dark except one. A single Terran message appeared in calm white letters. Warlord Threxval, remain where you are. They are focused. The first thing the Terrans took was the sky. Not with fire, not with falling debris, not with some grand show of revenge, but with silence. 1 minute, the Dominion ships over New Cedar were broadcasting command codes, threats, and proud declarations across every frequency. The next minute, they were 3 dead shapes hanging above the town, their engines locked, their weapons cold, their crews trapped behind systems that no longer listened to them. At the edge of Main Street, Dominion soldiers kept checking their helmets, tapping their wrists, looking up as if the warships might explain what had just happened. Threxval stormed out of the mayor's office with Sareva close behind him, his armor lights flashing angry red. "Restore command," he snapped. "I want every ship in orbit ready to fire warning shots across the settlement perimeter." His communications officer stood frozen beside the shuttle ramp. "My lord, orbital control is gone." "Then use ground relay." "Ground relay is gone." "Then use Imperial Emergency Command." The officer looked sick. "That is gone too." Threx grabbed the officer's console and stared at the screen. The only message left was the same calm white line. "Warlord Threxval, remain where you are." Sarava's own tablet chimed again. Reports flooded in from across Dominion space. Fuel depots sealed by remote treaty authority. Jump gates placed under Terran lockout. Command buoys switched to civilian-only traffic. Military payroll accounts frozen. Automated shipyards refusing war production requests. Not a single city was touched. Not one hospital lost power. Not one food convoy was stopped. Earth was not attacking the Dominion. Earth was removing every tool Threx could use to hurt someone else. That precision frightened Sareva more than destruction ever could have. Destruction was emotional. This was accounting. "They are dismantling the occupation network," she said quietly. Threx rounded on her. "They are farmers." "No," Sareva said, watching another fleet status indicator turn gray. "They are people who learned how to make farmers safe." Above them, one of the Terran ships descended through the cloud layer, slow and heavy, its hull scarred from old service. It did not aim weapons at the town. It parked itself between New Cedar and the Dominion flagship, like a man stepping between a bully and a front porch. A channel opened on every speaker in town. The voice that came through was female, American, steady enough to make people breathe again. "This is Colonel Rebecca Hayes, Terran Union Marine Corps, acting under Kennel Protocol enforcement. New Cedar civilians are not targets. Dominion ground forces will power down weapons and remain visible. Medical services are protected. Warlord Threxval, you will submit to lawful custody pending tribunal review." Caleb, standing by the hardware store, whispered, "Holy cow." Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself. Mayor Brooks sat down on the curb because her legs finally gave up pretending. Threx lifted his chin toward the speaker. "I am Imperial Command Blood. I do not submit to livestock law." The voice did not change. "You are not being asked." Sareva stepped back from him then, just one pace, but everyone saw it. The Dominion soldiers saw it too. Their rifles lowered a little more. They were beginning to understand that Threx was not standing inside power anymore. He was standing inside consequences. Inside the clinic, Ethan heard the broadcast through the old wall speaker. Angela was changing the bandage along Ranger's side, working with the soft focus of someone who refused to let fear into her hands. Ranger opened his eyes at the sound of the Terran voice, then looked at Ethan as if asking whether the house was safe now. Ethan rubbed the white fur between his ears. "Almost," he whispered. Lisa climbed down from her chair and came to the edge of the exam table. "Mr. Walker, are the soldiers here for Ranger?" Ethan looked through the clinic window, where the first Terran Marines were walking down the ramp in plain gray armor, not rushing, not shouting, just arriving like a promise finally kept. "Yes," he said, "and for you." And for everybody else he stood in front of. Outside, Threx tried one last time to look larger than the moment. He raised his voice for the cameras, for his soldiers, for whatever history he thought might still belong to him. "The Empire will answer this insult." Sarava's tablet chimed again. Her silver-blue face went still as she read the new message. "The Empire is already answering." Threx turned. "What did they say?" Sareva looked at the dead ships above New Cedar, then at the clinic where an old dog slept under a warming blanket while an entire town waited around him. Her voice was barely louder than the wind. "They are asking Earth what mercy will cost." By sunset, New Cedar no longer looked occupied. The Dominion banners were gone from the water tower. Their soldiers stood in neat lines near the shuttle with their weapons powered down and their helmets off, looking smaller without the theater of fear around them. Terran Marines held the street quietly, not like conquerors, not like heroes expecting applause, but like people doing a job that should not have been necessary. Colonel Rebecca Hayes walked into the clinic with red dust on her boots and removed her helmet before speaking to Ethan. "Mr. Walker." Ethan looked up from the chair beside Ranger's table. He looked older than he had that morning. "Colonel." Her eyes moved to Ranger, still sleeping under the warming blanket. "How is he?" Angela answered before Ethan could. "Stubborn. Tired. Alive." For the first time all day, the corner of Ethan's mouth moved. "That sounds like him." Hayes nodded, then set a tablet on the counter. "The Empire has offered full withdrawal from New Cedar, reconstruction funds, medical support, and a formal apology. They are asking what else Earth requires before we release the military lockout." Ethan looked through the window. Outside, Threxval stood surrounded by Marines. No chains, no public humiliation, just custody. Somehow that felt heavier. He had wanted to be feared. Instead, he was being processed. "What happens to him?" Ethan asked. "Tribunal," Hayes said. "Open record. Civilian witnesses. No shortcuts." Threx heard enough through the open clinic door to lift his head. "You could end this with power," he called. "Instead you hide behind courts and rules." Ethan stood slowly. Ranger stirred, and Ethan rested a hand on his shoulder until the old dog settled again. Then he stepped outside. The whole town seemed to pause with him. Lisa held her mother's hand near the school steps. Mayor Brooks stood beside Mrs. Alvarez. Sareva watched from the edge of the street, silver blue face quiet with something close to shame. Ethan stopped a few feet from Threx. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform for the cameras. "You thought mercy meant we were too soft to do anything else," he said. "That is where you got it wrong." Threx's jaw tightened. "And what is mercy, human?" Ethan looked back at the clinic, at the old dog who had crossed the street to save a child who was not his species, not his family, not his responsibility in any law book until humans made one. Mercy is having the power to destroy a man and choosing to make him answer instead. The words settled over Main Street without echo. Colonel Hayes looked at Ethan. "Your recommendation?" Ethan took a breath. He thought of Hannah, of promises made in kitchens, of the way Rangers still trusted the world enough to sleep after it had failed him. New Cedar gets protected status. Every civilian colony in this sector gets the same. Children, medics, shelters, rescue animals, companion animals, all recognized under treaty law. No exceptions. No loopholes. Hayes nodded. "And the lockout?" Ethan looked at Threx once more. "Lifted after the Empire signs. Not before." Sareva stepped forward, her voice softer than it had been all day. "They will sign." She looked toward the clinic. "I did not understand what he was to you." Ethan shook his head. "That was never the point." Sareva blinked. "Then what was?" Lisa answered before Ethan could. The little girl stood beside Ranger's empty leash on the clinic step and said, "He stood in front of me." No diplomat in the street improved on that. 3 weeks later, Ranger came home. He walked slower, with a brace on one back leg and a gray blanket over his shoulders. But when the school bell rang, he lifted his head and insisted on going to the gate. Ethan told him, "You are retired, old man." Ranger sneezed in disagreement. The children laughed, human and alien together, and the sound drifted across New Cedar like something worth defending. Years later, people across the galaxy would argue about fleets, treaties, and the day Earth made an empire beg without burning a single city. But on New Cedar, they remembered it more simply. A girl ran. A dog stood. A man stayed calm when his heart was breaking. And the galaxy learned that love is not weakness. Sometimes love is the line. And when decent people draw that line together, even empires have to stop.